From the outside, my life in Los Angeles looked perfect. A glamorous job, a sleek apartment, and a bank account that screamed success. But behind the selfies and late-night emails, I was quietly unraveling. I didn't know it yet, but the real cure for my anxiety was waiting thousands of miles away, on a cluster of emerald islands across the Pacific. I used to believe that if you worked hard enough, Los Angeles would eventually reward you. That's the myth we're sold. The grind now, shine later promise. For a while, I clung to it. 12-hour days at a downtown creative agency, 7-day work weeks if a client launch was looming. I told myself it was temporary, that the next promotion would bring balance. Instead, the city ate everything I gave and demanded more. My mornings began before sunrise with a phone buzzing like an angry hornet. Slack notifications, client emails stamped urgent even when they weren't. I'd check messages while brushing my teeth, already tense before my first cup of coffee. The commute that followed was a slow-motion battle through smog and brake lights. 10 miles stretched into an hour and a half of exhaust fumes and podcasts I barely heard. Inside the office, glass walls, cold air, a view of endless freeway, time blurred. Campaign meetings rolled into last-minute pitches into quick brainstorming sessions that devoured lunch. My job title said creative director, but most days I felt more like a firefighter, racing to douse other people's emergencies. I wore stress like a second skin. My jaw ached from clenching. My shoulders knotted into stone. Headaches sharpened behind my eyes until the glow of a laptop felt like punishment. I started carrying ibuprofen everywhere, a small bottle rattling in my bag like a warning bell. The city itself was an accomplice. Los Angeles never slowed. Billboards screamed the next blockbuster. Rooftop bars throbbed with music until dawn. People bragged about their exhaustion like it proved ambition. I played along at first, complaining about 80-hour weeks over overpriced cocktails, laughing when someone said we'd sleep when we're dead. But inside I was fraying. Relationships didn't survive the schedule. Dating felt like another job. Networking disguised as intimacy. Everyone had a hustle, a side brand, a podcast launch. Conversations sounded like pitch decks. I lost count of the half-finished dinners, the late-night texts that started with sorry swamped rain check and ended in silence. My body finally rebelled. The first panic attack struck during a client presentation. My chest clamped tight, breath shallow, edges of the room fuzzing out like a bad signal. I thought I was having a heart attack. The ER doctor said, "Classic anxiety," and handed me a brochure on mindfulness. I drove home through a blur of taillights, shame mixing with fear. Sleep became another casualty. I'd crawl into bed near midnight only to jolt awake at 3 a.m., mind racing through deadlines. Coffee became my only reliable friend. 3 cups before noon, 2 more by late afternoon. My hands trembled. My heartbeat stuttered in odd rhythms, but without caffeine I couldn't function. Friends from back home in the Midwest called me lucky. "You're living the dream," they said, picturing palm trees and movie stars. I didn't have the heart to explain that most days I barely saw the sun, that palm trees were just silhouettes in the smog outside a conference room window. One evening, after a 14-hour day prepping a virtual reality campaign, I caught my reflection in the elevator mirror and startled. My face looked hollow, skin sallow under fluorescent light, eyes flat like coins. I was 32 and already felt ancient. That night, standing on my apartment balcony with the city buzzing below, the truth hit hard. I wasn't living. I was maintaining, a machine built to meet quotas, to answer pings, to keep moving no matter how small the reward. And the machine was breaking. I didn't yet know what came next. I only knew I couldn't keep feeding myself to a city that never noticed I was there. The night everything started to shift was almost embarrassingly ordinary. It was a Tuesday, late enough that the city outside my windows had settled into its neon hum. I was still in work clothes, black slacks, a blouse wrinkled from 10 hours in a desk chair, half sunk into the corner of my couch. My laptop was open, but instead of spreadsheets or pitch decks, I was scrolling through travel blogs like a thief stealing moments of someone else's freedom. I don't remember the exact headline that hooked me. Something about leaving the rat race behind. Normally, I'd roll my eyes. I'd read those pieces before. Couples who sold everything to buy a van, digital nomads chasing Wi-Fi signals across Bali. But that night, something cracked in me. The photos of turquoise water and rice field sunsets, weren't just pretty. They were a dare. I clicked one link, then another. A woman about my age described how she'd walked away from her high-pressure job in New York to work remotely from a small island in the Philippines. She talked about waking to the sound of roosters instead of alarms, swimming before breakfast, meeting neighbors who actually knew her name. She wrote about cost of living so low she worked part-time and still saved more than she had in the city. I read every word twice, my chest tight with a strange mix of envy and relief. Something inside whispered, "What if that could be you?" The idea sounded ridiculous. I had a career people envied, a condo with a skyline view, health insurance, a retirement plan. Walking away wasn't a vacation. It was free fall. Still, I kept scrolling. Soon, my browser was a mosaic of possibility. Guides to digital nomad-friendly countries. Articles about Southeast Asia's warm climate and welcoming culture. Forums where freelancers traded tips on visas and co-working spaces. The Philippines kept popping up, like the universe was underlining it in bright yellow. English widely spoken. Internet reliable enough for remote work. Cost of living a fraction of Los Angeles. Beaches that look like screensavers come to life. At first, it was just a guilty nighttime habit. I'd tell myself I was only curious, that I'd close the laptop once the urge passed. But each evening, the tabs multiplied. I began reading expat testimonials over morning coffee, bookmarking budget breakdowns between meetings. I learned the difference between a tourist visa and a long-stay visa, the average rent for a 2-bedroom apartment in Cebu, the price of fresh mangoes compared to my $15 LA green juice. Every statistic was another crack in the life I'd built, yet doubt shadowed every click. Was this just escapism? A fantasy to distract me from burnout? Could I really leave everything, friends, family, career, because a blog made island life look like salvation? One Saturday, I wandered into a neighborhood cafe I loved for its quiet back patio. Instead of my usual marketing journals, I opened a spreadsheet titled "If I Left." I started listing expenses: mortgage, utilities, car insurance, dry cleaning, dog walker fees. Then I compared them to the numbers I'd found for living in the Philippines. The difference was almost laughable. I could cut my monthly costs by 2/3 and still have reliable high-speed internet for client work. I stared at the totals until the coffee went cold. For years, I'd believed I needed every dollar of my salary just to survive. Now I saw how much of it paid for a lifestyle that was quietly killing me. That night, I lay awake not from anxiety, but possibility. For the first time in months, the tightness in my chest loosened. I imagined mornings without an alarm, workdays set to my own rhythm, evenings lit by real stars instead of LED billboards. And then came the thought that changed everything. Maybe I don't have to stay here. When the fantasy first appeared, it glowed like a neon postcard. White sand, turquoise water, mornings unspooled like silk. But reality soon elbowed its way in. I wasn't 21 with a backpack and a year to burn. I was 32 with a career, a mortgage, and a lifetime of practical Midwestern wiring. If I was serious, I needed more than pretty pictures. So I started to research like it was my job. Each evening, after the last Slack message fizzled, I opened a different kind of spreadsheet. Visa requirements, healthcare options, cost comparisons, internet speed tests from half a world away. The more numbers I gathered, the more startling the contrast became. Finances first. I totaled my monthly burn rate in Los Angeles. Mortgage, HOA fees, utilities that spiked every time the AC fought the heat, gas for my endless commute, parking tickets I pretended were a city tax. The figure hovered around $6,800 a month, before food or the occasional brunch that somehow cost $40. Then I compared it to expat budgets in the Philippines. In Cebu City or Davao, long-term renters reported paying $600 to $800 for bright 2-bedroom apartments near the water, healthy groceries, fresh fruit, and market vegetables for a fraction of what I spent on kale smoothies. Even high-speed fiber internet, non-negotiable for remote work, averaged $50. The math was almost insulting. I could halve my expenses and still live more comfortably than I did in LA. Healthcare next. My parents' biggest fear was always, what if you get sick? So I dug into expat forums and government websites. I learned about international health insurance plans designed for remote workers, Many covered private hospitals in Manila and Cebu that, according to long-term expats, offered care on par with major American cities, often with shorter wait times. Connectivity. As a creative director turned freelance consultant, reliable internet wasn't optional. I cross-checked speed test maps and read geeky threads about fiber networks expanding through Philippine cities and even resort towns. The consensus: major urban centers had connections as good as, sometimes better than, what I paid triple for in Los Angeles. Safety. This was the sticking point for my mother, so it became mine too. I read U.S. State Department advisories, expat safety tips, crime rate comparisons. Big city neighborhoods varied, of course, but the numbers for Cebu or Davao were on par with, sometimes lower than, certain LA districts where I'd thought nothing of walking alone at night. Still, data wasn't enough. I needed voices. I joined online groups for digital nomads and Filipinos who welcomed foreigners. At first, I lurked, scanning posts about banking and language barriers. Slowly, I started asking questions. What surprised you most about moving there? How hard is it to find community? The replies poured in. A graphic designer from Toronto described potluck dinners where neighbors shared homemade adobo and fish fresh from the market. A retired nurse from Chicago said strangers helped carry her groceries before she even asked. Each story felt like a hand extended across the Pacific. But numbers and anecdotes couldn't quiet the counter voice in my head. The practical Midwestern part of me trained to chase stability. You have a good job, it whispered. A retirement plan, health insurance. You're going to throw it away because you're tired? The voice was relentless. I countered with memories of my panic attack in the conference room, of insomnia and a heart that skipped like a broken metronome. Was clinging to a paycheck really stability, or just a slow collapse with benefits? Some nights I paced the apartment, torn between terror and an almost physical longing for something different. Other nights I remembered summers in Michigan where my parents still lived. Bare feet in grass, long twilight walks without the soundtrack of sirens. Maybe I wasn't chasing a fantasy. Maybe I was trying to reclaim the simple human pace I'd lost. One Saturday, I forced myself into a kind of stress test. I imagined staying in LA 5 more years. I pictured more promotions, a bigger salary, maybe a nicer condo. Then I pictured the inevitable. Deeper lines on my face, a heart that never unclenched, relationships that withered in the glow of my laptop. For the first time, the so-called safe path looked like the real gamble. The next morning, I woke before dawn, not from anxiety, but clarity. I brewed coffee, opened my laptop, and began a new spreadsheet titled Plan B, Flights, Visa application timelines, a running list of everything I'd need to sell or store. I still hadn't booked a ticket. But a quiet shift had taken root. The Philippines was no longer a daydream. It was a map, and I had started tracing the way out. The moment I started telling people, the idea became real and terrifying. I began with my parents. They still lived in the small Michigan town where I grew up, the kind of place where neighbors still wave from porches and the biggest traffic jam happens when tractors cross Main Street. We talk every Sunday, a ritual I'd kept through every promotion and panic attack. I called on a Wednesday instead. "Sweetheart, is everything okay?" My mom asked before I'd even said hello. "I'm fine," I said, though my voice betrayed the tremor in my chest. "Actually, I need to tell you something. I'm thinking about moving. Out of the country." Silence, then a sharp intake of breath. "Moving where?" "The Philippines," I said, and rushed on before nerves stopped me. "I can work remotely. It's safe. I've been researching for weeks. Wait, the Philippines? Honey, that's so far. What about your job? Your health insurance? Earthquakes?" Dad cut in, steady and measured. "Let's hear her out." So I explained everything: the cost of living, the remote work possibilities, the panic attack, the creeping burnout I'd hidden for years. My parents listened, my mother occasionally gasping, my father asking the practical questions: visas, banking, emergency contacts. When I finished, Mom sighed, a sound of worry and love tangled together. "I just want you safe," she said. "If you really believe this will make you happy, we'll support you. But promise you'll get good insurance. And call. Often. Her blessing felt like a soft landing I didn't know I needed. Telling friends was different. At brunch with my closest LA circle, 3 women I'd met during my first agency job, I dropped the news between sips of cold brew. "I'm moving to the Philippines," I said, trying to sound casual. Maya choked on her avocado toast. "Wait, what? Like, for vacation?" "For good, or at least long term." They stared as if I'd announced I was joining a space mission. "But you have everything here," Jen said. "The job, the condo, the car. People would kill for your career." "That's kind of the problem," I said. "I'm killing myself for it." Their reactions split neatly. Disbelief, envy, quiet judgment. Maya confessed she'd fantasized about moving to Portugal but never thought it possible. Jen, ever practical, peppered me with questions about 401ks and future promotions I'd be throwing away. "I just don't get it," she said finally. "You've worked so hard. You can't just quit." But I could. Back at the office, the reveal was even trickier. My boss, a polished visionary who thrived on 14-hour days, summoned me to the glass-walled conference room after I sent a resignation email. "I don't understand," he said, hands steepled. "You're on track for creative director of the entire West Coast. Why walk away now?" "Because I'm exhausted," I wanted to say. "Because my heart races every time my phone pings. Because I can't remember the last time I felt alive." Out loud, I settled on, "It's time." He blinked, uncomprehending, then offered a counter-proposal. Remote work from LA, a sabbatical, more pay. The old me would have jumped, but I'd already glimpsed something larger than salary. "I appreciate it," I said, "but my decision's final." He nodded stiffly, the conversation already a closed file in his mind. The hardest conversations, surprisingly, were with acquaintances. The gym friend who called me brave, the neighbor who said, "Must be nice," with a brittle smile. Each comment forced me to examine my motives. Was I running away or toward? Did it matter? Every reaction, supportive or skeptical, pushed the plan from dream into certainty. Late one night, after another round of questions from well-meaning colleagues, I sat on my balcony and listened to the city drone. I realized that for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what people thought. Their doubts only underscored what I already knew. Staying would be the riskier choice. I landed in Manila just as the late afternoon sun slipped behind a bank of soft clouds, tinting the sky a pale peach. The terminal buzzed with a mix of languages, Tagalog, English, laughter, and the steady hum of rolling suitcases. After years of sharp, cold airports in the US, the warmth that met me here was startling. Not just the humidity, though it wrapped around me like a heavy quilt, but the smiles. The immigration officer said, "Welcome home," without even realizing how those 2 words would lodge deep in my chest. I'd booked a month in a furnished condo in Makati, assuming I'd spend that time exploring before deciding on something more permanent. The studio was small by Los Angeles standards, but the view of the skyline glittering against the bay made me forget every square foot calculation I'd ever obsessed over. The building staff greeted me each morning with cheerful "good mornings," sometimes offering mangoes or small packs of local coffee. Back in LA, I'd barely known the names of my neighbors after 5 years. The first week was a gentle unraveling. I still kept my West Coast work schedule, logging on for video calls at odd hours to sync with US clients. Yet outside those meetings, my life slowed. I wandered through Legazpi Sunday Market, tasting lumpia and fresh coconut juice, losing track of time. I walked the tree-lined paths of Ayala Triangle Gardens, letting my shoulders drop, my breath deepen. Every corner seemed to hum with community. Children playing tag, grandmothers gossiping over Halo Halo, teenagers sharing dance routines for TikTok. A friend of a friend introduced me to a small circle of expats and locals who worked remotely too. We met at cafes with fast Wi-Fi and a steady supply of Barako coffee, strong and earthy. Some were software developers, others writers or designers. They all shared a common philosophy: life first, work second. They'd chosen the Philippines not only for the lower cost of living, but for something less tangible, a feeling that life didn't have to be a constant race. On one humid evening, we gathered at a rooftop bar overlooking the Pasig River. As neon lights flickered below, I confessed how lost I'd felt in Los Angeles. I worked so hard to build a life I never had time to enjoy, I admitted. A local friend, Liza, nodded knowingly. "Here," she said, "we work to live, not live to work. That's why we smile even when the traffic is terrible." Traffic, yes, Manila had plenty. Jeepneys painted in wild colors, tricycles weaving through cars, the occasional sudden downpour turning streets into mirrors. But even the chaos carried a strange ease. Drivers waited patiently when a stray dog crossed the road. Strangers shared umbrellas. The city pulsed, but it never felt like it wanted to devour me the way LA had. Within a month, my routine transformed. Mornings began with fruit from the wet market. Sweet pineapples, tiny bananas, fragrant papaya. I'd brew strong coffee and watch the sunrise paint the high-rises gold. I worked 4 or 5 focused hours for my US clients, earning the same dollars but spending far less. Afternoons belonged to me, Pilates classes, art exhibits, spontaneous ferry rides to Corregidor Island, or simply reading in a cafe while rain drummed the roof. Slowly, the knots of anxiety that had ruled my life began to loosen. I noticed it in the small things, how my jaw no longer ached from clenching at night, how I woke without that familiar dread. The time difference meant fewer late-night emails and zero pressure to be always on. My productivity actually improved. With no commute and fewer distractions, I delivered better work in less time. Weekends became miniature adventures. A quick flight brought me to Cebu's powdery beaches. A few hours by bus and boat landed me in the turquoise waters of Palawan. I snorkeled with sea turtles, hiked through limestone cliffs, tasted seafood so fresh it practically melted on the tongue. Each trip reminded me how narrow my world had been when I was chained to a desk in Los Angeles. Money stretched in ways that felt almost unreal. What I used to spend on one LA brunch with friends now covered a week of groceries, internet, and electricity. I rented a larger one-bedroom apartment in a quiet Quezon City neighborhood for less than half my old rent. With financial breathing room came emotional space. I finally started saving, investing, dreaming beyond the next deadline. But the biggest shift wasn't in my bank account. It was in the way I related to people. Filipinos had a way of making me feel seen. The security guard at my building asked about my family back home. The fruit vendor remembered which mangoes I liked best. My new friends invited me to their parents. Houses for fiestas where laughter spilled out onto the street and strangers passed plates of lechon as if we'd known each other forever. That warmth seeped into me, rewiring something I hadn't realized was broken. One night, during a neighborhood fiesta, music and chatter filled the warm air. I found myself dancing barefoot in the street, surrounded by neighbors I'd only met weeks before. As fireworks bloomed overhead, I thought about the woman I'd been in Los Angeles. Tired, restless, lonely in a crowd of millions. She felt like a distant memory. I wasn't naive. I knew life here had challenges. Typhoons, power outages, slow government offices, the occasional pang of homesickness. Yet those inconveniences felt minor compared to the relentless grind I'd escaped. Here, joy outweighed hassle. Connection outweighed stress. By the end of my second month, I extended my lease. I applied for a longer-term visa. I didn't call it permanent. Labels still scared me. But I knew I wasn't ready to leave. For the first time in years, I felt rooted not by obligation, but by choice. Sometimes during my early morning calls with clients back in California, I'd catch my reflection in the laptop screen. The woman looking back at me seemed lighter. Not just slimmer, though the daily walks and fresh food helped, but unburdened. My hair caught the soft Manila light, and my eyes carried a quiet calm I hadn't seen since my early 20s. When people back home asked why I'd moved, I struggled to give a neat answer. Quality of life, I'd start, or work-life balance. But those words felt too small. What I really wanted to say was, I found a place where life feels like life again. Where neighbors greet you like family, where the ocean is never far, where the day ends not with exhaustion, but with gratitude. Standing on my balcony one evening, watching jeepneys rumble past and children play basketball in the street, I realized that this wasn't just an escape. It was a rebirth. Manila, and the Philippines beyond, had given me back the one thing I didn't know I'd lost. The simple, astonishing pleasure of being present in my own life. When I boarded the ferry from Batangas to Mindoro, the salty breeze and the rhythmic slap of water against the hull felt like a gentle drumbeat, calling me deeper into this country I was beginning to love. Manila had slowed my frantic Los Angeles pulse, but the provinces promised something quieter still, a life measured by tides and sunrise, not by meetings or notifications. I carried only a backpack, my laptop, and a promise to myself: no work for 1 full week. Puerto Galera greeted me with a burst of color. Fishermen mending turquoise nets, children racing along the sand, the scent of grilled fish drifting from tiny seaside shacks. My rented nipa hut sat a few feet from the shoreline, its bamboo walls breathing in the ocean breeze. That first evening, I lay in a hammock watching the horizon blur into molten gold. The air vibrated with nothing more urgent than the distant strum of a guitar. Here, life unfolded with an easy rhythm. Mornings began with a swim in water so clear it mirrored the sky. I'd dry off in the sun while sipping fresh buko juice straight from the shell. Afternoons meant wandering jungle trails with a local guide named Arnel, who taught me the names of birds whose calls sounded like laughter. Evenings brought impromptu gatherings on the beach, neighbors singing old love songs while kids chased each other in the surf. No one asked what I did for work. No one cared. They wanted to know if I'd eaten, if I was happy, if I'd joined the next round of karaoke. It struck me how different these conversations felt from those in Los Angeles, where every introduction came with a silent resume exchange. Here, value wasn't measured by productivity, but by presence. People lingered over stories, listened without glancing at phones, laughed from the belly. I began to realize how starved I'd been for that kind of connection. A week stretched into 2, then 3. I kept up my US contracts, 4 focused hours in the cool of early morning, the rest of the day wide open. The work felt lighter, more creative. I designed a campaign for a California startup while sitting barefoot on the sand, the sound of waves replacing the sterile hum of office air conditioning. My clients noticed the difference. "Whatever you're doing," one emailed, "keep doing it. Your ideas are sharper than ever." Traveling through the islands, I found a deeper truth. The Philippines wasn't just easing my stress. It was reshaping my idea of success. In Los Angeles, success had meant hustle, high rent, and a calendar packed so tight I forgot to breathe. Here, success looked like balance. It looked like finishing a project at dawn and hiking to a hidden waterfall by noon. It looked like having time to call my mother just to chat, to learn how to cook adobo from a neighbor, to sit quietly and let the sun set without a single photo posted. On Siquijor Island, often whispered about for its folklore, I joined a village fiesta. Women in bright dresses danced barefoot to a live rondalla band. Children tugged me into the circle until I was laughing so hard tears blurred the stars. Later, an elderly woman clasped my hands and said in careful English, "You have found your light again." I believed her. As months passed, the contrast with my old life sharpened. In Los Angeles, I'd chased wellness trends, juice cleanses, boutique gyms, meditation apps. Yet constant anxiety had been my normal. Here, wellness was baked into daily living. Fresh food from the market, walks through fragrant greenery, laughter as medicine. My body changed naturally, stronger, leaner, sun-kissed. But the deeper shift was mental. The insomnia that haunted me for years simply vanished. I wasn't blind to challenges. Typhoons swept through with fierce winds. Power outages sometimes interrupted calls. I missed my family, and dating while living half a world away posed its own complications. But these felt like real, human obstacles, not the soul-crushing grind of deadlines and traffic jams. They required patience, not burnout. One evening, as I kayaked alone in a lagoon ringed by mangroves, bioluminescent plankton lit the water with every stroke. It was as if the sea itself recognized my presence, answering back in sparks of blue light. I thought of the woman I had been in Los Angeles, hunched over a steering wheel in gridlock, jaw tight, heart racing. I wanted to tell her, there is another way. By my 6th month, I committed fully. I applied for a long-term visa and signed a year-s lease on a small house overlooking the sea in Bohol. From my porch, I could watch fishermen at dawn, hear roosters crow, smell the day's first batch of pan de sal baking down the road. My mornings began with gratitude before a laptop ever opened. Friends back home often ask if I'll return to the States. "Don't you miss the energy of LA? The opportunities?" they wonder. I tell them the truth. I found opportunity here, the opportunity to live, to create without suffocating, to measure wealth in free time and deep breaths. I still earn US dollars, still grow professionally, but my life belongs to me now. Sometimes I video chat with old colleagues while the sound of distant waves filters through my microphone. They notice the calm in my voice, the color in my skin. A few have even visited, curious if the transformation they see is real. They leave with the same revelation I had. The Philippines isn't just a place. It's a reminder that success without joy is failure in disguise. Now, when I walk the beach at dusk, I think of Los Angeles with a kind of tender gratitude. That city showed me ambition, creativity, drive. But the islands taught me balance, kindness, and how to simply exist without apology. The frantic woman who once lived for weekends is gone. In her place stands someone who wakes each morning to the scent of salt and the promise of another unhurried day. A woman who finally understands that the true meaning of life isn't found in the hustle, but in the quiet, generous rhythm of a place that welcomed her home. When I realized a full year had passed since I stepped off that first plane in Manila, I sat on my porch overlooking the Bohol Sea and tried to remember what life had felt like in Los Angeles. The details came back easily: endless traffic on the 405, the sharp smell of asphalt heating in the sun, the constant vibration of my phone demanding attention. What was harder to recall was the person I had been inside all that noise. The woman who measured worth in hours worked and emails answered had started to feel like a stranger. Here in the Philippines, my life had grown into something quieter, deliberate, and whole. I wake before sunrise without an alarm, the sound of roosters and waves blending into a gentle invitation to start the day. The first light spills across the water like a slow-moving lantern parade, and I sit with a cup of strong Barako coffee from the local market, breathing air that tastes faintly of salt and sweet coconut. 4 focused hours of remote work follow. My clients in California are just finishing dinner when I log on, and by the time the rest of their city wakes up, I've already sent designs, answered questions, and delivered projects. I still earn in US dollars, but my cost of living here is a fraction of what it was in Los Angeles. A breezy home near the sea costs less than the rent on my old cramped apartment. Fresh vegetables, tropical fruit, and fish from the morning catch fill my kitchen for the price of a single LA lunch. The financial freedom is real, but the deeper gift is time. By late morning, I close the laptop and step outside. My neighbors are already moving through their own routines, sweeping yards, chatting over tiny cups of coffee, children chasing each other before school. Life unfolds at a pace that invites participation. I join a neighbor for a walk through the rice fields, help carry baskets back from the market, or simply sit and listen while elders share stories of storms weathered and harvests celebrated. No one asks what I do for a living. They ask if I've eaten, if I'm enjoying the day, if I'd like to join them for merienda. That simple hospitality continues to amaze me. In Los Angeles, community often meant scheduling dinners weeks in advance, checking calendars, and juggling time zones. Here, it exists in the present moment. When a sudden tropical rain sweeps through, everyone instinctively pulls laundry off lines and checks on each other's windows. When someone is ill, pots of soup appear on their doorstep without a word. During fiestas, entire neighborhoods gather to share food and laughter. I've been invited to birthday parties of people I barely knew and treated like family every time. These gestures are not performances, they are a way of life. The absence of constant urgency is what first struck me. In Los Angeles, I always felt a low-grade panic, a sense that I was falling behind, that if I stopped moving, I would disappear. Here, the metric is different. Productivity matters, but it is never the sole measure of a person. A good day is one where you connect, with the land, with neighbors, with yourself. This shift began changing me in ways I didn't expect. My body relaxed. The migraines that once sent me searching for dark rooms simply faded. I slept deeply for the first time in years. My mind, freed from constant deadlines and traffic jams, began to wander creatively again. I started sketching for fun, something I hadn't done since college. I found myself lingering over books instead of scrolling through endless news feeds. I discovered an ability to be still. Of course, life here is not a postcard. Typhoons roll in with fierce winds. Power outages happen without warning. Bureaucratic tasks like renewing a visa can take an entire day of waiting in humid government offices, yet these challenges feel human, not soul-crushing. They require patience and resourcefulness rather than adrenaline and panic. Even the inconveniences teach resilience and perspective. When a storm knocked out electricity for 2 days, neighbors gathered to share candles, food, and stories. Instead of feeling stranded, I felt held. Periodically, I returned to the United States to see family, and those trips remind me why I chose this path. The sheer speed of American life now feels almost alien. Friends rush from appointment to appointment. Conversations tilt inevitably toward work promotions, housing costs, and how little time anyone has. I listen with love, but no longer with envy. I realize how normalized my former exhaustion had become. The contrast throws my current peace into sharper relief. What surprises my clients back in Los Angeles is how much more productive I've become. Distance forced me to refine my routines and focus intensely during those few morning hours. My designs are sharper, my ideas fresher, and I meet deadlines without the frantic energy that once defined my days. Many assume I'm on a perpetual vacation. I smile and let them think so. They don't need to know that this life is built on discipline as much as it is on freedom. It is a deliberate balance of work that supports life instead of consuming it. Over time, I've learned that the real success I was chasing in LA, bigger titles, higher rent, social proof, was never about money or status. It was about the feeling I thought those things would bring: security, recognition, the right to rest. The Philippines gave me those feelings in their pure form, without the trappings. Security here comes from community and from knowing my needs are simple and met. Recognition comes from being seen as a neighbor and a friend, not as a job title. Rest comes naturally when the day itself encourages it. I measure wealth now in unhurried mornings, in the sound of children playing outside while I finish a project, in the time to call my parents just to talk. I measure success in how easily I can breathe. Standing at the water's edge in the evenings, I sometimes imagine my old self inching through LA traffic, jaw clenched, calendar overflowing. I wish she had known she could choose differently. I wish she had understood that stepping away wasn't failure, but freedom. I don't know how long I will stay here. Maybe years, maybe decades. But I do know this. The decision to leave Los Angeles saved me. It gave me space to remember who I am beneath the noise. It taught me that life can be measured not by what we accumulate, but by the quiet moments we fully inhabit. The Philippines didn't fix me. It simply offered the environment where I could fix myself. I took that invitation, and in doing so, I finally found the life I was meant to live.